Hi everybody, it's Mikey from Usuallybrokencars. Today you join me and my R53 Mini Cooper S while we give you the ultimate buyer's guide to an R53 Mini Cooper. Now, let's start from the beginning. Very quick history lesson on the BMW Mini. So, starting in 2001, you get the Mini 1, you could get the Mini Cooper, and you get the Mini Cooper S. The Mini Cooper was the sort of sportier car, but the Mini Cooper S, which we're talking about today, was the fun one. It came as a 1.6 litre supercharged engine. Now that supercharger made it produce 163 horsepower. Now, it might sound a lot to today's standards, bearing in mind this is nearly 25 years ago, but that was a pocket rocket and still is today. They're great fun to drive. Now, they had an update in 2004 which changed to a Teflon supercharger and a little bit of wizardry with the ECU, which took them to 170 horsepower. You could then also get the JCW, which is the John Cooper Works car. Now, the John Cooper Works car, worth a lot more money, and they're a really different kettle of fish. There are 200 horsepower in those. And then they did a final version, which was the John Cooper Works edition, GP. Now the GP came with 210 horsepower, it had Recaro seats, it was lightweight, it was a stripped out basic version, and they only made 450 of those cars globally. Seriously cool car. I would love to do a living with on a John Cooper R53 Works GP car. So if you've got one and you want me to do a video on it, hit me up, let's do that. So let's get into this video and let's have a tour of the R53 Mini Cooper S and let's go through some of the common problems that you might encounter with one. The R50 Mini platform, whilst they're pretty solidly built little things, they are prone to a bit of corrosion. Now, most of the time that corrosion is hidden underneath the plastic trim. Down here, you won't see a lot of that corrosion. So it's always good if you can get it on a ramp. The most common place you will see corrosion on these is here, and as you can see on mine, it's actually collected some water in that space, and that is why you get corrosion in that space there. As for the rest of the body, they're not too bad. We'll have a look underneath it and we'll show you what it's like underneath for corrosion. If those of you are lucky like I am, you have access to a ramp to get underneath your vehicle. Now, underneath the vehicle, they have a habit of rotting out these battery trays. This is just some light surface rust. It does look bad, but she is solid. Going back to the handbrake, these are your handbrake arms. They have a habit of seizing and getting stuck on, and that's what causes those rear brakes to bind up. You also want to be looking at your rear suspension arms. So again, this is just surface rust on these. These are still nice and solid, but they can get very thin and very poor. Again, underneath, checking these brake lines, you can see mine have been done. You can see here, this brake hose is getting a little bit perished, so we might need to do something about that sooner rather than later. A really common place for corrosion on these is inside this rear quarter here, which sits behind the rear wheels. Again, I'm quite lucky, this is just surface corrosion on here. This is still nice and solid, but they can get very crusty under here. Same with this side as well. Have a good look underneath it and make sure there's not too much corrosion. A little bit hiding up there on mine. You might have to address that. While you're underneath the vehicle, these things, as I said, love to leak oil from the top of the vehicle, but also from the bottom. Mine, luckily, I've managed to sort out a couple of the oil leaks. If you saw my video a few weeks ago, this was absolutely covered in oil, but I'm gonna need to put a new sump bung in it. And I've still got a leak coming from up the top, which is most likely going to be the rocker cover. They are very common for leaks. It's a lot easier to check the condition of the belt under here. Check your condition of your front subframes. Again, very common place for these to be damaged if the vehicle's been involved in any kind of accidents. Now, one of the most common problems on these, as I said up the top, leaking power steering fluid. Really common. You can see mine has that leak. I haven't had the chance to address it yet, which is why I overfilled my power steering fluid. If you can, check the operation of your power steering fan, your cooling fan. You can do that by getting the power steering up to temperature and then having a look and see if you can hear it. Very common to have failed drive shafts on these. The CV boots have a habit of splitting. Have a look, see if the CV boots are split. If this rubber boot is split and it's spewing out grease, it's a good indicator that your CV boot is on its way out. Very common upgrade for these is to do poly bushes back here, because these have a habit of splitting, failing, and then you get a horrible ride. The previous owner luckily had changed these out for poly bushes, so that is a little win for me. If you're enjoying watching this video, there's a few things that you can do to help me out. Hit the subscribe button, like the video, and hit the notifications icon. Thanks for watching, everybody. Now, back to the video. Where possible, try and buy a car that has got the xenon lights. They make a massive difference. Apparently the standard lights are like a lit candle on a dark night, whereas these are fantastically bright lights. So see if you can get one with the xenon lights. Whilst looking under the bonnet of your potentially new Mini Cooper S, there are several things to check. Now, one of the things you need to look for is oil residue, getting emulsion build up inside that cap. Now, there's a tiny bit there, I wouldn't be concerned. That is just going to be due to condensation. Whilst under the bonnet of your potentially new Mini Cooper S, there are several things you want to check. One of the big things on these is overheating. That is going to be due to the fact that you've got a big intercooler sat on top of that engine block, getting it overheated. The same with the ignition coil pack over the back here. Now, these can get very hot. You can get spacers for these to help keep them cool. People do also move these as well. I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. When it comes to the cylinder heads, underneath the rocker cover, they can get very hot and they can crack. Very prone to it. A really common failure point for Minis is the dipstick. These are made from plastic and they have a habit of snapping off the end of the dipstick and leaving it in the bottom of the sump. You can't get a proper reading, so have a look for one that's maybe had an upgrade to a metal one. If not, definitely think about putting it in as a replacement idea right at the start. Another common thing to look for, it's going to be quite a hard one to see, is the condition of the belt. Now the belt itself, hiding down here, you can just about see it there. If you can get a good view at it, have a look, because a lot of the time they are neglected because they're a bit of a pain to change. Mine was done when it had the new supercharger pulley fitted. Another common thing to check under the bonnet is power steering fluid. These things like to leak just for the fun of it. So I've overfilled mine. You use MV CHF fluid, and the reason being, it's not general ACF fluid. You've got to use CHF, but I've overfilled mine because I know I've got a leak. Another thing to look at is brake pipes. Now mine's had the brake pipes done, luckily. They're very common to corrode underneath, so if they've been done up here, there's a good indication that they've all been replaced. Regarding the superchargers, now when they facelifted the Minis and they upgraded the supercharger, they were Teflon coated. The Teflon coated superchargers are far superior than a standard supercharger off of the 163 pre-facelift. So if you have the opportunity to get a facelift, do, because you're more likely to have a good ordered or good working ordered supercharger. The other thing to check for on these is a decent service history, because that supercharger does need servicing, it does need looking after. Finally, these typically tend to burn around 250 ml of oil per 1,000 miles. So that will not see you through your oil changes. So that's why you need to check your oil levels regularly on these, because they do burn through it. A really common problem is failed central locking. Now I'm lucky mine works. Now it's something that you want to check because they are very common. There's a solenoid inside the door latch that has a habit of failing. So if you can use the buttons, so the lock and unlock on your keys, if that doesn't work, that might indicate you've got a flat battery on the key. Otherwise, you've got a failed solenoid inside your door. Next up, with the vehicle half raised, we need to check the conditions of our road springs and top mounts. The top mounts have a habit of being quite noisy, and the springs do have a habit of breaking. So if you can get in and have a feel and see if you can find any damaged springs. The next thing you're going to do is look at the wheels and tyres. Now this particular Mini, my Mini, has got 4 budget tyres from 4 different brands on it. A lot of the time, people swap out the standard tyre for a non-run flat. So from factory they have run flat tyres. A lot of people swap these out for a non-run flat tyre, which actually increases the performance and road handling by quite a margin, because they are a very rattly little car. So by changing out to a non-run flat tyre, you actually get a lot more flex in this sidewall, which produces a much more comfortable ride. The other thing to look for is overheated brake discs. Are they red? Have you got red brake dust around the wheels? Because the rear, especially, these rear handbrakes have a habit of getting stuck on and getting bound on and causing the vehicle to bind up on the rear on the handbrakes. Very, very common problem on these. When it comes to the interiors on the Minis, there's not a lot to go wrong on them. The inside is pretty bare bones. If you can, get one with the chrono pack like I've got. Now, some people say the chrono pack is a waste of time. I recently watched my oil pressure drop to 0, which helped me massively diagnose the fault. So if you've got a chrono pack, that's a big help. Another thing, the 6-speed Minis have a habit of having difficulty getting reverse. It can be a bit fiddly to find reverse sometimes. Don't worry, that isn't a faulty gearbox. It's not an issue, it's just standard with these. So it can be a bit of a pain to get reverse sometimes. Higher horsepowered Minis, people that have modified them, do tend to report they get clutch slippage quite early on in the life of these. So that's definitely something to look out for. Another thing to look out for in these is the audio. The Harman Kardon, they have a habit of blowing the amplifiers. The amplifiers on these are located in the back of the vehicle, in the boot. They're flipping expensive if you can get your hands on one. The AC is probably one of the only things you might have an issue with. They have a habit of splitting the condensers at the front of the vehicle, but all of these switch dial packs, these are generally pretty reliable. The factory audio, especially when paired with the Harman Kardon speakers, is actually a really reasonable setup. With regards to the seats, they have a habit of wearing on this bolster, just like mine has. As you can see, it's pretty worn out, so something worth looking at and something worth checking over. But the seats for these aren't expensive, so don't let that put you off buying a decent Mini. One of the final things to check for on the interior of your potentially new Mini is this carpet down here. So as I said previously, they can get wet. If they get wet inside, in here, the ECUs are underneath here. That is a very, very costly mistake. So if they get wet, that's potentially game over for your Mini. So make sure these are in good condition. The carpet is not wet underneath here. There is very little to check when it comes to the boot of your Mini. The only thing you really want to have a look for, up here, water can get in through your high level brake light and run in, potentially causing damage to the roof lining or getting into the boot itself. So just have a look at this, make sure there's no obvious signs of any damage. So a vehicle that is historically unreliable, I think is a bit of a myth nowadays. Yes, issues with the brakes, and yes, issues with overheating. But make sure you check both of those two things. They're the biggest problems with these Minis. Other than that, I think they're pretty good little cars. Hopefully, my buyer's guide will help you pick a runner and a decent car as opposed to a lemon. Let me know in the comments below if I've missed any obvious issues, because it might help somebody else buying a car. Let me know if this helped you buy a car. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'll catch you on the next episode. Bye!